Buongiorno, welcome. Hey, everybody. So I'm Nicole, for those of you who don't know me, from Vertical Crypto Art, and welcome to the gallery. I have the immense pleasure today to host half of operator, Dejha, who will be doing a talk on their practice as operator, but mostly on generative choreography. And well, Dejha will go into exactly what this is and what this means, but it's part of their newest kind of like iteration of their practice. And the collection that she'll be speaking about will be actually released on Art Blocks this spring, very soon. After Dejha, we'll have quite an open discussion actually on like decentralized art ecosystems. We have a lot of people from the Web3 ecosystem here. And yeah, we'd kind of invite as much as possible audience participation. So it's not going to be like a very formal kind of panel, but very much like an open discussion. So yeah, with this, Dejha.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello. So we are discussing generative choreography. I will call out that it's very rare to see me by myself. You would normally see me with Anya, who is both my collaborative art partner, but also my wife. So take a photo because this is probably something you won't see again, me by myself on stage. Okay, so let me tell you the story of Operator, how it came to be. So it was a very modern romance. We first met on Instagram, which, if any of you know of our practice, is very ironic because our practice is mainly focusing on surveillance capitalism and extractive technology, so it's a little strange. But we originally met to work together, and then we fell in love, and then we started working together, and then we became wives, and we still work together 7 years later. So Anya's practice is her background. She's a choreographer, a trained dancer, a performance artist. The human body, therefore, is the main material of her practice. And then my background is as a human-computer interaction technologist, as well as an immersive artist, working in large-scale environments, bringing together physical and digital spaces. And so together, our practice is immersive technology, performance art, and also large-scale environments. And the thing about our practice is that the human body is the central aspect of our individual practices as well as our collaborative practice. We think of the human body as the performer, the human body as the environment in the scene, the human body as it interacts with a computer or with some sort of interface, as well as the audience participant. This became very helpful when we had, museum commissions and exhibitions were open for 3 months and you can't pay for, performers every day at the museum. So we made the audience the performer. And then I would say that really, the focus of our practice is creating immersive worlds. And in that, we like to think of immersion not just as a physical state, but also an emotional and a psychological one. We have no allegiance to any one medium. We have allegiance only to the concept of the work. And you'll see we're using quite a bit of technology, and we're going to talk a bit about my wife is not here, she's in Tokyo, but I still say we. And we're going to talk about a bit about how immersive art and art and technology often have an expected aesthetic, right? And we often have this kind of like separatism between art and technology where, you have the tech world eye-rolling the art world for gimmicky uses of technology in art, but then you also have the art world eye-rolling the tech world for gimmicky uses of art, and both parties are kind of left, deflated and wondering if that's all there is. Peggy Lee. Then we'll keep dancing. Okay, so in order to avoid any, gimmicky uses of technology, we created the operator rules for art and tech. And so we established these in 2019, and we've been following them ever since. So the first is no tech demos. This is really important because we think that the audience participants should feel the effects of the technology, but not thinking about the tech as they're experiencing the art. It's kind of like if we were having a phone conversation, Nicole and I, and, I called Nicole, and Nicole was like, hey, she picks up, how's it going? Like, great, but isn't it so wonderful, this technology? And we only talk about the technology of the phone without having a real conversation, right? And so this kind of happens with art and tech sometimes. We forget about the art part. And I think also, even if it was high tech, and even if you were trying to flex, high tech doesn't equal visible tech, so it's not something that we want to see anyway. So don't rely on scale. This is the next. So you can see a lot of our work is big in scale. It has an aspect that it can pull you in with, awe-inspiring qualities of scale, but that's not enough. We have to immerse people again, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically as well. And then the next is, if the tech is no longer novel, will the work still hold up, right? So we see Namjoon Paik's electronic superhighway there. These TVs, probably you can't find them anymore, buy them anymore, fix them anymore, but the work is still solid, even after the technology has expired. We have no allegiance to technology, only allegiance to our cat who likes to sit on me while I read in the bath. And the last rule for art and technology by operator is no to spectacle. This comes from Yvonne Rainer, right? The idea that art that uses technology, or any art for that matter, isn't about spectacle. It has to hear the concept. This is a performance by Pina Bausch. Okay, so what I like about this is that you have a very skilled dancer, and in Pina Bausch's performance that she said, she has this dancer doing every trick and gimmick in dance that you could see him do with perfect technique. And he's out there saying, what else do you want from me? To the audience, asking, what else do you want me to do? And I think the equivalent now would be like, what do you want? Machine learning, AI, 6 million images in your data set, and it's like, is that enough to have that technical flex? We have to work beyond that. So it's important for us to use the technology conceptually and not just technically, because we think that tech doesn't age well, but concepts do. So now we get to the aspect of the privacy collection. And so Nicole mentioned earlier that our next release is coming out later this month, and it's part of an ongoing privacy collection. Our explorations in privacy started in 2019 with the museum commission from SCAD Museum of Art. This was a project that was a theoretical parallel to the Selfie Museum, except for it was like really looking at how selfie culture dominated our practice as experiential artists, or the medium, therefore. And we started making this about, selfie culture. And then very quickly we arrived to the concepts of surveillance capitalism. And that Shoshana Zuboff book actually came out in February 2019, the same moment this installation came out. So it gave us the vernacular that we needed. And then after this, this was a project that the contemporary art world was having a little bit, they were rejecting it. And so in 2019, after we released this project, we wanted to share it with the world. But the only people who got it were all the crypto art folks, because they were being rejected too, I think. And there was the same 10 people in basements all around the world. I'm sure some of them are here. And so while we weren't using blockchain technology in our practice at that point, this was the community that was open, right? Open to see new things. So we have some of these people in the room. 2019, forever ago. Okay, so after On View in 2020, we created I'd Rather Be in a Dark Silence Then. And this was a signal blocking trench coat. And so any device that you put into the pocket, any RFID object, couldn't be tracked, hacked, or monitored. This was an artwork that was the cross of fashion and function, but also conceptual art, not necessarily solution to the issue. We had an interview with Mokta, with Eleonora Breezy, and then she put the coat on view, Eleonora did, at Renaissance 2.0 in 2020. And most of the work at that show was very digital, and it looked digital, but then we had this coat, and everyone's like, what's with the trench coat just laying there? Did someone there was like a coat check, and someone just left it there in the space. And so we thought that what we would do is, in our experiential medium, what we would do is explain what the coat does through an immersive installation. That went on to win the Lumen Prize in 2021, and that set up the groundwork for Privacy Collection, which is focusing on how privacy functions in a Web3 context, the tension between privacy and transparency on chain. This project is very much site-specific to crypto culture. So whereas the previous projects were looking through a Web2 lens, this has a very set criteria. The criteria is Web3 privacy, crypto site-specific, as I just said, a focus on the human body, because one thing that we saw coming into crypto art and looking at this, thinking, hey, there's more opportunity to explore bringing the human body to on-chain art. And so this was something that was interesting to us, as the human body is a central aspect to our practice. And then lastly, and this is more of a materiality note, the use of transparent materials and glass and acrylic materials in a way to see under the surface, which is why you'll see many X-ray techniques. So the lots started in 2022, February, and you can see we've had many lots along the way, and then they'll keep going until we decide this artwork is finished. But the first release was a privacy key. This was 9 experiential keys. That the collector could essentially come on a journey with us from the beginning of the privacy collection to the end. We created this 3D asset, which was very shiny and looked like a utility knife. This was very tongue-in-cheek, and actually this asset is just a 3D asset. It's not the art, because the art part is the experience that the collector has as we take them through this journey. And so the other thing is, we had never, interacted with audience participants in the way that they could collect our work. And so what we did is that we had a series of privacy dinners where we could introduce the concept of the artwork through a series of dinners, because we don't do Discord, but we do dinners. So then the next release was the attempts. This was 11 choreographic attempts and movements for the first lot. And then the second was privacy portraits, which were at Proof of People in London. It was in July. Wow, time is going fast. You can see we anonymized 67 collectors' portraits through performance art and using analog algorithms and analog techniques. The next was the Unknown Sitter, which we won't go into too much, but the totality of the privacy collection has 88 works. And so the next lot is being released this spring, and it's called Human Unreadable. So this gets us to the on-generative choreography part, right? We can get into the meat of the project. And as I had mentioned, the criteria of the privacy collection, it has to be site-specific. So what site are we creating for this lot of the privacy collection? Well, it's on-chain, long-form, generative art. We dig back into early generative art. There was always, and I'll take a few steps back in case some of you aren't familiar with generative art, in which that the artist builds a computer program, an algorithm, and then that program itself outputs artwork, right? So while the artist creates the program, they don't necessarily control every output that is coming from that program. So you can create a program that could create 1,000 drawings or pieces or plotter artworks. But you have no control once you set that free to kind of control what it does, and it's kind of like creating like a child or something. It's like you put them out into the world, and then there's only so much you can do to control it at that point. And so in early generative art, there was always an aspect of curation where you could have say 1,000 outputs, but only select the 10 that you like. But now with generative platforms like art blocks and FX Hash, this aspect of curation has gone away. So you really have to, as an artist, make sure that the program you're creating always outputs something that you are finally going to like. Now, one thing that Anya and I noticed is that there was really, again, this opportunity to bring the human body into digital art, I think at large, but also crypto art, and especially generative art. So we started thinking about how to create a work that was embodied generative art. And if we look at, existing generative art, there's this kind of tendency to lean into masculine coded modernism. And we wanted to explore, well, what does it look like to move away from modernism and this kind of so-called universal voice, and towards physicality and towards sensuality, towards chaos, right? Because there's only so much that you can actually express within a Swiss grid. And so coming back to the criteria, we decided that it was important that for Human Unreadable, that we create an artwork that the body is at the core. And in that, the human body will be hiding in plain sight on chain. So there are 3 phases. This is very much an experiential artwork. And if you are familiar with art blocks or generative art platforms, usually you mint the artwork, and then after that, the experience is over. But we have an experiential artwork, a slow recovery of the human in 3 phases. So first is the reveal, as you normally know it, where you mint the token on art blocks. Then the second is that you decipher this underlying choreography, this underlying human body. We'll get a little bit into that in a moment, and that will make more sense. And then finally, there is a final live performance. So now what I want to do is I want to bring you through the process of the creation of the work. So in this on-chain generative choreography method that we've developed, it starts and it ends with the human. So we have the human body in physical space, and then we bring that body and that movement into code, right? And we create a generative model, and then we bring it back out into the physical world. So here's us creating this project, which took about 9 months. And so on the topic of babies, I guess that's how long it takes to make a baby. So the first aspect of creating this project was creating a motion library, a movement library. And in that, Anya designed individual movements. These are about 30 to 60 movements that she originally designed. And then at the glitch residency, there's some glitchers here. So hello. At the glitch residency in November, Anya was rigged up in a sort of like very scrappy VR motion capture rig. And with that, we were able to create these FBX files, the kind of files that you would rig to an avatar, right? And with that, then we had this individual like library of sequences that we saw play back in animation. And then Anya relearned with another performer all of that animation. And then we did an analog algorithm, a way to generate unique choreographic sequences in a way that we could have this algorithm design the choreography. So you could take out the need for the choreographer and instead put in the algorithm. And you can see these look really, really bad. And I think it's important to show how bad these were, because there's a double challenge for us in this project in creating a generative work, right? Because the challenge is always, right, we create this program that creates infinite outputs, right? And all of those visual outputs need to look wonderful. But we have a double challenge where the choreography will finally be performed live. So this also has to look really, really solid. So in that, Anya took that motion library and she revised and revised it through a series of performances in the studio where she could really dial in the individual moves. So once we were happy with the motion library, we had to move to motion capture. And so this is Anya in the studio in LA at HeTech Studios. And we strapped her up into the motion capture suit. This is very high fidelity data, the same kind of data that you would use to apply to a Hollywood avatar or a video game. And we know that blockchain is great for many things, but it's not very much meant for big volume of data storage, right? So if we were to take all of the data that we just captured with Anya in the suit, this would cost us something like $200,000 to upload on chain, right? So even if we had $200,000 to do this, it's not very much something that we thought was very medium friendly to blockchain. So what we did is we spent a considerable amount of time, I would say probably 50% of the artwork creation process was figuring out what the workflow was from a high resolution data set into something that could be stored on chain. So we went from FBX to CSV to JSON, and you can see we had bone budgets. Our collaborator, Isaac Patka, we call him the bone budget accountant, because this is how much we spent to deploy. But if you could see, the original movement data this is 3 seconds of movement, right? The spreadsheet goes about 1,000 lines down and 900 to the right, okay? And this is entirely too much data. So what we did is we built a conversion tool system to analyze this data and go frame by frame and really pare it down to just the essentials. Just the essentials. Anya was doing something that I have never seen a choreographer do, which is she was choreographing in spreadsheets. And because I'm married to her, I had to tell Isaac, one of our engineer collaborators, that he has to deliver the news that she'll have to be in spreadsheets for the next 2 months. And when she wasn't hitting, when she was like, no, I don't want to do it. And then I was like, Isaac, that's between you and Anya. And he successfully got her to choreograph in spreadsheets. So there she is. Here's the proof. But what was that process like? Well, you can see the avatar moving in the bottom left there. And you can see Anya going through the individual movements. And what she was trying to figure out was what part of that move is important and essential to keep. Not only the frame of that movement, but do I need the arm? Do I need the full arm? Do I need all the wrists? Do I need the neck? Do I need the head? What signals the value of this move? And what can be discarded. So as a choreographer, she was making those choices and continued to choreograph throughout the process. So here we spent $3.23 per bone per move. And that's what the final choreography looks like. It goes to the right a bit more, but you can get a sense. So on your left over here, you can see that this is what some of the motion data looks like when we were finally done with it, right? That's just one move, and it probably would continue back down to the wall there. So once the motion data was complete, the next part of the process was to look at what this project would actually look like, right? So we just spent, 5 months dealing with motion data. And we're like, okay, well, now it has to look like something. This was just the beginning. And so what we did was we returned to both the materiality of the privacy collection and also decided very early on, is this going to be a still image or is this going to be a motion picture? And Anya and I both instinctually were like, this is going to be a still image, and we wanted to infer motion. How do you bring choreography to life in a still image? The glass and X-ray materiality, you can see some of these aspects were used in the previous lots. But the way that we created X-ray and glass material in the previous lot was either using organic real glass, right, in the privacy portraits, or we were, we were creating them in 3D, 2D rendering applications. But here you can't do that. We had to begin by building materials with code. We weren't able to, export from a 3D file. And so we had to make glass with math. So this was that was the second challenge of this project, was how to make convincing glass with math. So here you can see we had a degree of success. It's a little blown out with this projector. It's a great projector. I'm not dissing the projector, but it just isn't looking very shiny. But the thing about this is that if you were to render this in a 3D program, this would take probably 3 hours, 4 hours to render. And this is happening real time because it's made with math. And so the thing is that our early attempts at glass didn't look very good. They looked like this, very crappy glass. And it's important, I think, to show the things where good stuff comes from, and it comes from bad stuff. So we made a lot of bad stuff for weeks and weeks and weeks until we got to the good stuff. Okay, so we made our glass with code, and next was bringing in human bodies. So of course we have the human body in the code stored on chain, not all the motion data, but we wanted to use body parts in a surrealist way as an object, right? These have nothing to do with the choreography, but we had to figure out a way to bring in body parts that weren't rasterized images. So we did photography, and then we turned them into SVGs, and then we placed them onto the canvas after we turned them into SVGs. But the thing is, well, I won't get too deep into it, but we had to reinvent this protocol because you can't actually have more than one library dependency on art blocks, and we had already used ours, so we had to go through some effort to do this. But I always love to point this out because when you see these body parts on the canvas, it seems really easy, right? You just drop them in, but this actually took really intense math that also Isaac, he was like, I used to build these laser machines, and they're the size of the building, and I had to point them, and I'm using the same exact math as I used for that as for this. So yeah, he wasn't expecting to come back to that. Okay, so the next part of the process, right? So we created the motion data, the motion library. Then we created all the materials, all the stuff that was going to be included into the final artwork. If we were building a house, we would go and gather our materials. And in this case, it was the glass material and the X-ray and the body parts. And now we had to build a generative model. And this generative model would take all of those ingredients and bring them together into one unified vision. So the first thing that our model had to do was to take the individual, movement data, the individual library of moves, and it had to create a unique score. So for instance, if you've minted a piece on art blocks before, each artwork underlying has a unique token hash, right? No two pieces will ever have the same hash. And so what we've done is we've taken that concept of the token hash, and we've developed something called a choreographic hash. And so beneath each artwork on art blocks, there is in our art blocks piece, Human Unreadable, there's a unique choreographic sequence under each mint. And that drives all of the visual parameters of that work. So the way that it looks and how it behaves and the materiality and all the compositional elements have been driven by this unique choreography. However, you can't actually see the dance in the image because it's a still image. So we'll get back to, well, what do we do with that score later? So you can see here, this is Anya doing generative choreography tuning. This was a couple weeks ago in a JPEG's event in New York. And we did this in about 3 different cities with 22 dancers in order to, every time that we updated the model, when we saw the performance played back, we made revisions and revisions and revisions from there. So, how the choreography drives the actual final artwork. The artwork is something that is really about creating meaningful mapping. So, for instance, we had the movement of the waist twisting and turning that would physically twist and turn the glass. So all the parameters that one could change with this single piece of glass. So this single piece of glass, as well as 5 others, are the same glass that is used in every single piece, but they look wildly different based on what parameters were actually being tweaked here. The components of the artwork have 2 pieces of glass, a body part, a motion path, and X-ray. So when you see this line here, or these vector kind of drawings, you can see that that is one of the aspects of the choreography that is driving the piece. But all of these are driven. So you can see a bit of our visual processing workflow here. Now, these are our early testnet images. When we first wired everything up, it was super stressful because it was like the night before testnet and we're just putting it all together, and it started creating things that we never intended to see. And in that, we saw lots of things that were really, really beautiful, but we had no way of getting back to them because we were just wiring this up for the first time. And so you can see here's some selections of things that we really, really loved. But then there's this kind of like unrequited love in generative art where, once you see something, you can maybe potentially never get that thing back. So we created custom tools in order to pick all of the hashes that we liked, and then we downloaded the JSON files and spit them into this sort of data analytics machine that we built, where we could say, well, this one's good, and this one's bad, or this is messy, or this is money, or this is minimal and beautiful, and we would give qualities and attributes to it, each token hash, and then we would spit out a graph and say, okay, this is what these pieces have in common parameter-wise. And then we would try to reverse engineer and get back to the ones that we loved. And so we did this rinse and the repeat, and finally we got to this moment where it felt like we were trying to tame the ghost in the machine in this process. So you can see here are some of the layers decomposed. We also found out in Safari that there's this really nice tool where it will explode all the layers, and we could see what was happening where. And we were really, taking these tools and using them in order to investigate the artwork itself and learn about how it was being created. So here are some of the final script outputs. So the project is being uploaded to mainnet this week. So the code is locked, and here are some of the imagery. Here's some of the imagery from the final script outputs. You can't see necessarily all of the color in this, but people often say, is this black and white? And we're like, well, for operator standards, no, there isn't. These are actually full color images. Again, hard to see the nuances here, but there's quite a bit of color for an operator piece. The other thing is that when you look at them, you think, okay, well, these are really organic. Are these just rasterized images collaged on top of each other? But the answer is no, this is all made with math. You could see that we printed these pieces large format, so you can see them printed on transparent acrylic, large scale canvas, and it's important that the work is resolution agnostic because it has to be when it is on art blocks. It has to be able to scale infinitely. So one of the main challenges we had was creating this, creating art with math and creating this beautiful shiny glass, which one of the developers wanted to kill me. He's like, we just spent 7 weeks trying to figure out how to make the most perfect glass, and now we just make it look shitty and crappy and degrade it until we were happy with how it looked. So you can still see hints of glass here and there, but it's quite rare. And this is one of the pieces printed on acrylic as well. Okay, so the experience of the work. So I just told you about how we created the artwork, but how do we experience the work? So again, this comes back to the slow recovery of the human. We're trying to create embodiment in digital art and in blockchain art. And so the experience happens in 3 acts, as I mentioned earlier. So act 1 is the reveal, the mint on art blocks. You can see you have your piece there. Look at all that color. Do you see it? Full color. That's a full color image. So once you mint your piece on art blocks, you can see also you have your features list on the right. This is really important because there are no visual features in our piece, Human Unreadable. This is just the choreographic score. So you can't be like, oh, I got the one with the white background and the hand that does this, or I got the one that has like paint splatters everywhere, or I got the one with the x-rayed glass, or, da-da-da-da-da. Right? You won't be able to see the rarity of your piece based on that, because we kind of wanted to subvert this a bit, right? Because for us, it just seemed like, a way to, something that was interesting for potentially speculators, or ways to like attribute rarity to a piece for, financial gain. And so what we thought, it would be interesting if we just took that away altogether and just gave them the choreography score. So here you can see, is my piece a solo? Does it have repetition? How many unique moves is in the sequence? And then we also have an emotional climate as well as a vulnerability rating, right? So we made the vulnerability a feature. So in this part of the experience, the human is there. It's there in code, it's stored on chain, but it's not yet visible, really. It's still obfuscated. The second act is decipher. And this is where you go and you connect your wallet to the operator's site, and you're able to reveal a secondary token. So you go to the site, and you can choose to either keep it in the plastic, and some people like to keep the tags in their hats and things like that and not touch it, keep it preserved, and some people want to open it up and wear it. And so if you reveal the underlying choreography, what you're given is a movement score. And this movement score is a secondary token, fully stored on chain, no IPFS whatsoever. And these are all SVGs. So you can see on the right here, on the left, your left, is a Morris Cunningham score from 1960. This is a way to take movement that you've designed as a choreographer and hand it to someone, another dancer, another performer, or another choreographer, and then they can take that piece and they can go set that on stage, right? And so what this is that when you look at this, it's a more human readable way of seeing the choreography than looking at that block of code that no one can actually read on chain. We use something called the owner of function, so that the piece that you mint on art blocks is forever attached to the underlying choreographic score that created it. So these two can never be separated. They're bound together forever. And so in this moment, the human is just a little bit more visible than it was before. But then there's a final act of this artwork, which is the ability to witness and attend a live performance of all the unique scores that were created as part of the collection. So again, if we look at the choreographic score process, we took Anya, who was in a motion capture suit. We then took the data on the bottom here. We analyzed it and made our selection. Remember, Anya choreographing in spreadsheets. And then we took that, put it into our generative model, which then output a unique choreographic score. And that unique choreographic score created the final piece. So if you were to see it performed live, you could look at the two together and you could see, well, this dance looks nothing like the piece, but finally there's a final reveal where it's a fully visible, and you can watch generative, performance art with no screens, with no sort of visible technology. I think it's important to speak to the historical roots that created this project, because there's a tendency for people to get really excited about the first ever. And we like to say, first, there are no firsts. This is something that's really important to our practice, because if it is the first, it probably isn't anyway. And also, what's the merit in that? There's more value of building on top of one thing onto another. And we were staying at Frank Molina's house. He is He is a rocket scientist. He worked for NASA, and he passed away. And we were speaking with his son, Roger Molina, and he said, you know, my dad had a rule for the house and also his publication journal called Leonardo, in which one of the things you can never say are firsts, right? There are no firsts ever. And because of that, if a rocket scientist working for NASA can't say that, I don't think we can either. So I think it's important because then it allows you then to focus in on the aspects in history that you can continue and build upon. For instance, for us, we're interested in experiments of art and technology, the movement in 1967 with Robert Rauschenberg, Billy Kluver, and Bell Labs. There were many different performance artists and visual artists at the time who were part of something called 9 Evenings. And this for us was very, very influential. But what I really loved about 9 Evenings is that it wasn't just artist and engineer matchmaking, but it was actually the two of them, and some artists are also engineers and vice versa, but you had this ability to really work through things and invent things together with no preconceived notion of what you were creating. I'd like to quote one of our collaborators, Isaac, once more, because he said something really funny in our talk in New York a couple of weeks ago. You were there, Judy. And he said, he's like, we were like, Isaac, what's different about, working on this project? Because he hadn't worked on many art projects before. And he said, well, in engineering, when it works, the job is done. And in art, it seems that when it works, the job is just starting, right? And so at that last 5% of the creation of this piece, everyone starts getting really, really kooky because they're like, I don't get it. It's working. I think it's done. And we're like, no, it hasn't really gone through that filter yet. And then the other element that we pulled from is chance dance. This is Merce Cunningham as well. The idea of creating choreographic scores is really, really rooted within I Ching, John Cage, and Merce Cunningham chance operation techniques. And lastly, we have Ana Livia Cordillero as well as Jean Beeman, random dances and also pioneer in computer dance, right? And what's interesting is that they also wanted to create computer art that had an embodied physical, sensual aspect, moving away from modernism and towards something a bit more chaotic and a bit more messy. And I think about in technology, vulnerabilities are always things that are problems that actually need to be fixed. And we feel quite differently because we want to make vulnerability a feature in both our practice, but also within this work. So at this point, I'd like to maybe open up, Nicole, for some conversation. I think I'll let you guide that. But we have so many brilliant minds in the room, so it would be great to have a conversation all together.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any thoughts or comments or questions about anything that Dejha just presented. I'll wait for a bit. If not, we can also pause for 5 minutes or so and then reconvene to start this kind of like open format. But anybody has?
I have a very basic question. Are the final images experience, are they related to the movement that so when you see the still, it's based on the movement that is revealed later?
Yeah, kind of. It's that, and that's why I showed the what you would mint on art blocks, and then the what looks like the live performance on the right. I mean, clearly they don't look anything like each other, but what they have in common is that they're pulled from the same choreographic sequence. So, if there were 7 moves in a sequence, those 7, like the fact that there are 7 moves might affect a particular parameter that like twists the glass in a certain way or makes it more dense or chooses a particular body part or lays it out on the composition the way that it wants. Whereas then when you see it in the final performance, you're literally just seeing the raw performance, the underlying choreographic score that created that work. Does that make sense?
Okay. Luca, Do you want to pause for 5 minutes and start again, or do we go?
We can take a pause, but
Yeah.
let's ask them.
Do you,
Yeah, how do you guys feel? You ready for the next one, or you want to take a 5-minute break?
5 minute break?
Let's 5-minute break? All right.
Okay.